The chill that seeped into my bones that afternoon had nothing to do with the Ohio winter. I'd seen the look before, a flicker of dismissal in the eyes of men who saw people as numbers on a spreadsheet. But I never thought I'd see it directed at me. My name is Wilson Sterling, though everyone just calls me Bill. For 32 years, I'd been the bedrock of Aegis Dynamics, the guy who made sure the lights stayed on, the systems hummed, and the coffee machine never ran dry. 32 years of arriving before dawn, of knowing every pipe, every wire, every creaking floorboard in that sprawling complex in Harmony Creek. I'd seen the company blossom from a small startup in a converted warehouse to a tech giant with 4 gleaming buildings, and I'd been there for every single expansion, every late-night crisis, every unexpected flood. 4 days. That's all that separated me from my full pension benefits, a golden parachute I'd earned with sweat, early mornings, and a loyalty that bordered on the absurd. 4 days until I could finally hang up my work boots and embrace a future I'd meticulously planned, a future that included endless fishing trips and finally fixing that leaky faucet in the guest bathroom. But Jimmy Edward, the sharp-suited, perpetually on his phone CEO who'd been at the helm for the past 2 years, had just pulled the rug out from under me. He didn't even bother to meet my gaze, his eyes glued to the laptop screen, as if I were merely a glitch in his perfectly optimized algorithm. "Bill, we're restructuring," Jimmy stated, his voice devoid of any warmth, the words clipped and precise. The conference room, usually a hub of frantic energy, felt eerily silent, the fluorescent lights buzzing with a low, insidious hum. Through the glass walls, I could see the cubicles, a hive of activity where people I'd personally trained were tapping away, oblivious to the quiet execution taking place just beyond their view. They didn't know the man who taught them how to troubleshoot the server racks and navigate the labyrinthine HVAC system was being shown the door. "Budgetary constraints," he finally added, his eyes flicking up for a fleeting moment, a practiced, empty smile gracing his lips. "Leaner operations. Nothing personal, just business." I nodded, the gesture feeling foreign and stiff. What else was there to do? Argue? Plead? I'd witnessed the ignominious exits of others, men and women my age, their faces etched with disbelief as security guards escorted them out. That wouldn't be my legacy. The termination paperwork lay on the polished conference table, a stark white testament to my sudden obsolescence. It was all standard boilerplate. Final paycheck, health insurance information, the polite demand for company property. I signed where I was told, my signature a shaky scrawl with the same pen I'd used for years, its Aegis Dynamics logo faded and chipped. "Badge and keys," Jimmy said, his hand extended, palm up, a silent, expectant gesture. I unclipped my ID badge from my belt, the plastic smooth and worn from countless swipes through card readers. My employee photo, taken decades ago, showed a younger, fuller face, a head of hair still mostly brown, a hopeful glint in my eyes that believed in the promise of a dignified retirement. The keys, a heavy jingle of metal, felt like a physical weight in my hand. Master keys to every door, every equipment room, every supply closet, every loading dock. I'd been entrusted with the very heart of the company. I placed them in his outstretched palm without a word, picked up my copy of the paperwork, and walked out. Past the cubicles where heads remained bowed, past the break room where I'd eaten lunch at the same table for 3 decades, past the security desk where I'd checked in thousands of times. The parking lot was quiet, bathed in the muted glow of the setting sun. My old pickup truck started on the first try, a familiar, comforting rumble. I sat there for a long moment, the engine idling, staring back at the imposing glass and steel facade of Aegis Dynamics. Something felt profoundly wrong, a discordant note in the symphony of my life, but I couldn't quite pinpoint it. I'd built my life around that place. I started at Aegis when I was 30, fresh off a divorce that had stripped me of nearly everything. Facilities management wasn't glamorous. I was the guy who unclogged toilets and ensured the heating worked in the dead of winter, but it was steady, with good benefits, and they'd promised me that if I stuck around, they'd take care of me when I got old. Back then, Aegis was small, maybe 50 employees, 2 buildings, still figuring out its identity. I watched it grow, helped it expand into 4 buildings across the industrial district. When they needed someone to oversee the construction of the new data center, they asked me. When city inspectors came calling, I was the one they sent to smooth things over. I trained every facilities person who came after me, showed them how to read blueprints, how to negotiate with contractors, how to keep everything running without breaking the bank. Most of them moved on to bigger and better things. I stayed. This was my place. My wife, Naomi, passed away 7 years ago, a cruel battle with cancer. The company health insurance had covered most of the treatments, and Jimmy's predecessor had given me all the time I needed for doctor appointments and hospital stays. When she died, half the office came to the funeral. They were good people, a good company. Jimmy was different. When he took over, he was younger, fresh out of some prestigious business school. He viewed everything as a problem to be optimized, including the people who'd been there since before he was born. Consultants were brought in to enhance operational efficiency, and talk of right-sizing the workforce became common. The warning signs were there if I'd only chosen to see them. Jimmy stopped greeting me in the hallway. I was no longer included in monthly department meetings. My budget request came back with questions I'd never encountered before. Why so many maintenance contracts? Could we manage with fewer safety inspections? Wasn't I getting a little old to be climbing ladders? I dismissed it as him asserting his authority, a new boss making noise before settling into the routine. But then there were the hushed conversations that ceased when I entered a room, the meetings I wasn't invited to, a new hire in facilities who asked pointed questions about my job responsibilities, things he shouldn't have needed to know unless someone was planning for him to take over. I should have paid more attention, asked more questions, but I was 4 days away from my pension vesting, and all I could think about was reaching that finish line. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the termination paperwork spread out before me. The numbers didn't add up. According to my meticulous calculations, I had 32 years and 11 months of service. According to their paperwork, I had 32 years and 10 months. 1 month short of full pension benefits. I pulled out my old employee handbook, the one from 15 years ago when they'd updated the retirement policy. It was crystal clear. 33 years of service or age 65, whichever came first, for full benefits. I was 62 with 32 years and 11 months. 4 more days, and I would have hit the 33-year mark. Then I remembered the company-wide memo Jimmy had sent out just last month. I'd kept a copy, sensing its importance. Updates to the employee handbook, it read, clarifications about retirement benefits, and a reassuring commitment to honoring all existing agreements. I found it in my filing cabinet, exactly where I'd left it. Effective immediately, the memo stated. All retirement benefit calculations will be based on continuous years of service as defined in the current employee handbook. Employees approaching retirement eligibility should review their service records to ensure accuracy. I read it 3 times, then retrieved my old calculator. I started going through my pay stubs, every single one, going back 15 years. Holiday pay, overtime, vacation days, sick leave, everything was meticulously documented. Everything matched up to 32 years and 11 months of service as of that Friday. They had miscalculated on purpose, or perhaps they just hoped I wouldn't notice. I thought about calling Jimmy, demanding they fix the paperwork, but what was the point? He'd already made it clear I was done. Calling him would only give him another opportunity to concoct an excuse, another reason why the rules didn't apply to my situation. I considered getting a lawyer, but lawyers cost money I didn't have, and fighting a corporate giant with deep pockets felt like a young man's game. Then a name surfaced from the depths of my memory, Brenda Maxwell. She'd worked in human resources at Aegis for 20 years before retiring last year. A sharp woman, always by the book, never one to let the company cut corners when it came to employee rights. I'd heard through the grapevine that she was doing consulting work now, helping companies navigate the legal minefield of employment law. I found her number in my old contacts and stared at it for a long time. Making that call would mean admitting I'd been wronged, that I'd been naive. It would mean fighting back instead of simply accepting what had happened and moving on. But sitting there in my kitchen, looking at 32 years of pay stubs and a termination letter that defied the facts, something shifted inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I picked up the phone and dialed. Brenda answered on the second ring, her voice as direct and no-nonsense as I remembered. The kind of tone that compelled you to tell her the unvarnished truth. "Bill Sterling," she said, before I could even introduce myself. "I heard about what happened. Word travels fast in this business." I laid out everything for her. The suspicious timing of my termination, the glaring discrepancy in the service calculation, Jimmy's increasingly distant demeanor over the past few months. She listened without interruption, interjecting only with pointed questions about dates and documentation. When I finished, there was a long, thoughtful pause. "You kept all your pay stubs?" she finally asked. "Every single one. Company memos, policy updates, everything important. Naomi always told me to keep good records." "Smart woman, Bill. Now, I need you to listen carefully. What Jimmy did isn't just wrong. It's illegal. Federal law protects employees from being terminated to prevent them from collecting earned benefits. But proving it requires more than just the timing. We need to show intent." She explained how these cases work. The Department of Labor took them seriously, but they needed solid evidence. Documentation, a pattern of behavior, something that unequivocally demonstrated the termination wasn't just bad timing, but deliberate fraud. "Bring everything to my office Monday morning," she instructed. "Don't talk to anyone at Aegis. Don't post anything on social media. Don't even tell your neighbors what happened. If this goes where I think it's going, we want them to believe they got away with it." Monday morning, I drove to Brenda's office with 3 overflowing boxes of paperwork. Pay stubs, employee handbooks, memos, performance reviews, email printouts, 32 years of documentation, meticulously organized in chronological order. She went through everything methodically, her pen scratching notes on a yellow legal pad. When she reached Jimmy's memo from last month, she stopped and read it twice. "This is golden," she declared, her eyes gleaming. "He put it in writing that service calculations should be accurate. Then he fires you with an inaccurate calculation 4 days before you hit 33 years. Either he's incompetent or he's lying." "What's the difference?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Incompetence gets you your job back. Lying gets you your job back, plus damages, plus a federal investigation that could shut down their entire human resources department." She outlined the process. File a complaint with the Department of Labor. They'd investigate, interview witnesses, review documents. If they found evidence of deliberate benefit denial, Aegis Dynamics would face serious penalties, not just fines, but potential criminal charges for the people involved. "How long does it take?" I asked. "Depends. Could be weeks, could be months. But Bill, you need to understand something. Once we file this complaint, there's no going back. Jimmy is going to know you didn't just walk away quietly. He's going to fight back." She was right about that part. Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. Jimmy Edwards' name flashed on the caller ID. "Bill, I heard you've been talking to people about your termination," he said, his voice smooth, almost too calm. "I hope you're not planning to do anything stupid." I didn't say anything. "Look, I get it. You're upset. But we followed company policy to the letter. Your service record shows 32 years and 10 months. I've got the documentation right here." "What documentation?" I asked, my voice flat. "Your hiring date, February 20th, 1993. Your termination date, November 12th, 2025. Simple math, Bill." I knew he was lying. I started at Aegis on January 20th, 1993. I had the offer letter to prove it. But Jimmy was setting up his defense, trying to bait me into an argument over the phone where he could control the narrative. "I'm not looking for trouble," I said. "Good. That's good to hear. Because if someone were to file a frivolous complaint against the company, well, we'd have to defend ourselves. And defending ourselves might involve looking very closely at that person's work history, making sure they never violated any company policies, never took anything that didn't belong to them, never said anything that might have hurt the company's reputation. The threat was clear. Fight back, and they'd destroy whatever was left of my reputation." "I understand," I said, and hung up. But I didn't understand. Not really, because what Jimmy didn't know was that Brenda had already filed the complaint that morning. Brenda called me Wednesday evening with news that changed everything. "The Department of Labor moved fast on this one," she said. "They've been watching Aegis for a while. Turns out you're not the first person this happened to." She'd spoken with the investigator assigned to my case. Over the past 2 years, 3 other longtime employees at Aegis Dynamics had been terminated within months of becoming eligible for full pension benefits. All of them in their 60s, all of them with service records that had been mysteriously miscalculated. "They're calling it a pattern. Bill," Brenda explained. "Systematic benefit denial. The kind of thing that gets companies put on federal watch lists." But there was more. The investigator had requested personnel files for all 4 terminated employees. What they found was a series of emails between Jimmy and the new human resources director, a woman named Vanessa Price, discussing ways to optimize the workforce and reduce long-term benefit obligations. "They weren't even smart about it," Brenda said, a hint of incredulity in her voice. "Used company email. Talked about specific employees by name. Your name was mentioned 8 times in the past 3 months. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What did they say about me? That you were a legacy cost. That your pension and health care benefits would represent a significant ongoing expense. That your position could be eliminated and your responsibilities distributed among existing staff. They'd been planning this for months, while I was coming in early and staying late, while I was training new people and fixing their problems. They were figuring out how to get rid of me without paying what they owed." "There's something else," Brenda continued, her voice dropping slightly. "The investigator wants to interview you Thursday morning. They're bringing someone from the criminal division." "Criminal, Brenda?" "When a company deliberately terminates employees to avoid paying earned benefits, that's not just a civil matter, Bill. That's fraud. Wire fraud. If they used electronic communications to plan it, the people involved can go to prison." The emails were worse than Brenda had described. Jimmy and Vanessa Price hadn't just discussed terminating me. They discussed terminating anyone who was close to pension eligibility. They called it proactive workforce management. There was a spreadsheet, a chilling document with names and dates and projected savings. Each row was a life, a career, reduced to a financial line item. "Mr. Sterling," one of the investigators, a woman with kind but firm eyes, began, "Based on what we've seen, we believe Aegis Dynamics engaged in a deliberate scheme to defraud multiple employees of earned benefits. Your case is just the most recent example." They showed me more documents, internal company communications I'd never been privy to, memos about the cost of maintaining older employees, presentations to the board of directors that included a slide titled Legacy Employee Transition Strategy. My name was on that slide, along with the names of the 3 other employees Brenda had mentioned. We were all listed under Q4 optimization targets. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. We weren't just employees, we were targets. "We're going to need you to testify," the other investigator, a man with a quiet intensity, stated. "This is going to trial. Federal court. The people responsible are going to be held accountable." I thought about Jimmy sitting in that conference room, telling me it was just business, nothing personal. I thought about 32 years of getting up before sunrise, of fixing things that were broken, of believing that loyalty would be rewarded. It had mattered, just not in the way I'd always assumed. A quiet resolve settled over me. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. The federal investigation moved faster than anyone expected. By the following Monday, investigators had seized Aegis Dynamics' email servers and interviewed 6 current employees. By Wednesday, they'd executed a search warrant on Jimmy's office and the Human Resources Department. Brenda kept me updated on everything. "The investigators found more evidence than they knew what to do with," Brenda told me over coffee on Thursday morning. "Internal documents dating back 3 years, showing a systematic plan to eliminate older employees. Spreadsheets calculating pension savings. Email threads discussing the best timing for terminations to avoid legal challenges. They kept records of everything. Bill, it's like they wanted to get caught." She explained the brutal simplicity of their plan: identify employees approaching pension eligibility, find reasons to question their performance or necessity, terminate them just before their benefits vested, and save millions in long-term costs. Jimmy had presented it to the board as a financial necessity. The company was growing, but pension obligations were eating into profits. Younger employees cost less to insure and didn't require long-term benefit commitments. It was basic business math, he'd argued. What he hadn't counted on was someone like me keeping detailed records, or someone like Brenda understanding federal employment law, or investigators who took benefit fraud seriously. Friday afternoon, my phone rang again. Jimmy Edward. This time, his voice was different, higher-pitched, laced with a desperate edge. "Bill, I think there's been a misunderstanding about your termination," he stammered. "We should talk, work something out." "What kind of misunderstanding?" I asked, my voice calm, betraying none of the satisfaction swirling within me. "Your service record. We may have made an error in the calculation. If you'd be willing to come in Monday morning, we could review everything. Make sure you get what you deserve." He was panicking. The investigation was public now, mentioned in the business section of the local newspaper. Aegis Dynamics' stock price had dropped 15% in 2 days. The board was asking questions Jimmy couldn't answer. "I don't think that's necessary," I said. "Bill, please. We've worked together for years. Let's handle this professionally. No lawyers, no government agencies. Just 2 reasonable people working out a disagreement." But it was too late for reasonable. The Department of Labor had already filed criminal charges, not just civil ones. Jimmy was facing up to 5 years in federal prison for wire fraud and conspiracy to defraud employees of earned benefits. Monday morning, I got a call from the company's lawyer. Not Jimmy, but the actual corporate lawyer, the one they brought in when things got serious. "Mr. Sterling," he began, his voice smooth and practiced, "my client would like to discuss a settlement. Full reinstatement of your pension benefits, health care coverage, and additional compensation for the inconvenience you've experienced." "How much additional compensation?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "We're prepared to offer $50,000, provided you agree not to pursue further legal action." I told him I'd think about it. Then I called Brenda. "Don't take it," she said immediately, her voice firm. "Bill, they're scared. The criminal charges are just the beginning. Once this hits federal court, other employees are going to come forward. This is going to be a class action lawsuit worth millions." She was right. By Tuesday, the Department of Labor had been contacted by 8 more current and former Aegis Dynamics employees who suspected their terminations or benefit calculations were fraudulent. By Thursday, it was 15. The local news picked up the story. Federal investigation targets local tech company. Jimmy's photo was on the front page of the business section, looking uncomfortable in a suit that suddenly seemed too big for him. I didn't have to do anything but wait. The system was working exactly the way it was supposed to work, and Jimmy was about to learn what it felt like to have his future decided by someone else. Tuesday morning, I was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper when my phone rang. Brenda, calling earlier than usual. "Turn on Channel 6, she said. her voice crackling with excitement. Now! I found the remote and switched to the local news. The camera zoomed in on the imposing glass doors of Aegis Dynamics. Jimmy Edward was being led out of the building in handcuffs, federal agents carrying boxes of documents behind him. The reporter's voice filled the quiet kitchen, talking about wire fraud charges and conspiracy to defraud employees of earned benefits. Federal prosecutors alleged that Edward and Human Resources Director Vanessa Price engaged in a systematic scheme to terminate long-time employees just before they became eligible for full pension benefits, the reporter explained, her tone grave. The alleged fraud cost affected employees hundreds of thousands of dollars in earned benefits. The camera showed Jimmy stumbling slightly as the agents helped him into a federal marshal's vehicle. His face was pale, his usually perfect hair disheveled. He looked smaller than I remembered. The indictment charges Edward with 14 counts of wire fraud and conspiracy, the reporter continued. If convicted, he faces up to 70 years in federal prison. I turned off the television and sat in the quiet of my kitchen. 32 years of getting up before sunrise, of fixing things that were broken, of believing that loyalty mattered. It had mattered, just not in the way I'd always thought. Brenda called back an hour later with more news. The Department of Labor has completed their investigation. 18 employees were affected by the scheme. Total damages exceeded $2 million. Aegis Dynamics board has voted to terminate Jimmy and Vanessa immediately, and they've agreed to full restitution for all affected employees. My pension? I asked, my voice hoarse. Fully restored, she confirmed, backdated to when it should have vested, plus health care benefits and additional compensation for damages. How much additional compensation? $200,000, plus your legal fees. I thought about Jimmy telling me it was just business, nothing personal, just the way things worked. 3 months later, I was back in my workshop, the familiar scent of sawdust filling the air as I built a bookshelf for my daughter. The tools felt good in my hands, the rhythmic scrape of sandpaper against wood a comforting sound. It reminded me why I'd always been good at fixing things. My pension payments had started right on schedule, a steady stream of income. The additional compensation sat in my savings account, earning interest. I hadn't touched it yet, wasn't sure I needed to. After 32 years of steady work, I had everything I needed. Jimmy Edward had pleaded guilty to federal charges and been sentenced to 18 months in prison. Vanessa Price got 6 months and 2 years of probation. Aegis Dynamics had been acquired by a larger company that had cleaned house in the management ranks. The local newspaper had run a follow-up story about the case. Local man's complaint leads to federal investigation. They'd wanted to interview me, but I declined. I wasn't looking for attention or recognition. I just wanted what I'd earned. My daughter called while I was sanding the bookshelf. She'd seen the news story online and wanted to make sure I was doing okay. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said, her voice soft, "for standing up for yourself." "I didn't do anything special," I told her. "Just made a phone call. Sometimes that's enough." I finished the bookshelf that afternoon and loaded it into my truck. My daughter had been asking for one for months, and I finally had the time to build it right. Solid oak, dovetail joints, the kind of thing that would last for decades. As I drove to her house, I thought about the difference between building something and just fixing what someone else had broken. Both had their place, both mattered, but building something new felt better.